Okay, so here's the thing about teachers bullying students, okay? I'm not saying it doesn't ever happen because very clearly there are times where it is most definitely uncalled for. Not every teacher is the most professional person in the entire world. However, with my background in education and having been a teacher myself, and the fact that growing up my mother was also a teacher and she dedicated 20 years of her life to teaching children, and I spent a good solid decade plus after school in classrooms, from kindergarten to the end of my senior year, and even afterwards when I was in junior college, going and helping her. So, what can I tell you about teachers and so-called bullying and picking on students who are ADHD? The first and foremost thing you need to know is that teachers got better things to do than yell and scream and fuss at students. They do. We have a phenomenal amount of paperwork and just shit to deal with. It's about like being an air traffic controller for youthful immaturity. Is really about the best explanation for being a teacher. Uh, and what's worse is you got to do it sober. That's miserable, right? That's a joke. Don't bash me. Now, teachers got a lot that they're doing. They got a lot going on. They got things that they need to be doing, things that they would rather be doing, besides picking on kids, as you would so perceive it, singling a child out for disciplinary reasons, whatever you want to call it. They got other things they need to be doing, they would rather be doing, they ought to be doing, should be doing, and can't, because now some child has crossed a line, they've crossed a boundary, they've broken a rule. Here's the other thing you need to know about being a teacher. We are horribly outmanned, outnumbered, outgunned, and outresourced by students in the classrooms, right? Yes, we hold the ultimate power, but sometimes if we can't control the mob. So certain tactics have to be employed and certain control measures have to be put into place to maintain control over a classroom. You can call it controlling if you want. It's exactly what it is. It's not a bad thing, because the opposite is a teacher who can't control the classroom. That's not a good thing. Okay? So cool your jets when it comes to painting or labeling a teacher as being overly controlling, because yeah, they gotta be. You try running a classroom, trust me, it ain't easy. You gotta maintain control of the classroom, okay? Third is children have, it's a natural instinct. It's built into our nature, and it's built into our youth, and even into adulthood, and that is they have the natural instinct to define their boundaries, not by being told, but by pushing the boundaries themselves, and by pushing the envelope, and by pushing and pushing and pushing against the boundaries until it gets to the point where, and this is key, until it gets to the point where they no longer want to push it. They say, that's it. That is as far as I am ever willing to take this particular behavior, whatever that behavior may be. They define the limit themselves, okay? Now, you can define the boundary, you can define the rules. The child is going to define how far they push against it to find, in their mind, the true limit of the boundary, okay? All children do it, hands down, period. So what do you have to do? You have to define the boundaries at a point where children don't want to cross it, okay? Because after that step, the next thing to realize is the concept of the victory lap. It is alive and well in today's schools, especially with the decrease in, I'll say, the intensity of punishments and discipline. I'm not a fan of spanking. I don't think it helps. On the other hand, more and more we see school districts sort of bowing down and catering to the demands of parents who are not there. And the schools will bend to make the parents feel good instead of delivering what the child actually needs. So you, being the gung-ho activist parent, that feels like you can, that you wield the power to evoke some change, just understand one thing. Chances are you're going to hurt more things than you're going to fix by putting on your red cape and S and marching up to the school and marching up to the teacher and then marching to the principal and marching to the superintendent, all because of how you feel, and not because you were actually there in the classroom, and not because you actually witnessed what happens in the classroom every single day, and not because your child was completely and thoroughly truthful about what they did to even get in trouble, right? So, big part of that's on you, okay? So what have we talked about? We've talked about teachers got better things to do. We've talked about how students and children push against the boundaries naturally. We've talked about how they define their own boundaries, okay? And now we've talked about you, the parent, and how you feel entitled to go up and talk to the principal and superintendent. You should always talk to the teacher first and take the teacher's word for it, because they're the ones on the front line, okay? The teachers are the one gathering recon and intel. Your child is not. The teacher is the one with the actual intel, and you should definitely recon and intel from both the child and the parent, and then consider it to be two sides of the same coin. Because once your child falls into the bad graces of the teacher, it's usually for a really good goddamn reason. It's because your child is pushing the boundaries further than they should be pushed. And this is key. All of the other children observe and they modify their understandings of the boundary, and they update their definitions of the boundary and how far they can take things. The idea, the concept of the victory lap is still very much alive and well in schools, and children will often take a look at the behavior that they're about to embark on, what the result of that behavior is going to be, and then whether or not it is worth the disciplinary measure. Okay? Case in point, little Billy stole somebody's milk, and somebody's pissed off at Billy, and they think, I could go and just punch Billy right in the fucking face right now and get my milk back, but what would happen? I would go home and I would get grounded. Is it worth punching Billy in the face? Yes or no? If they decide yes, they're going to go punch Billy in the face. Teachers have to react swiftly to that. Okay? That's an extreme example, but the same thing is true for every disciplinary infraction that goes on in a classroom. Whether or not you define it to be too small or trivial or inconsequential doesn't really matter, because you're not the one running the classroom. You're not the one up there with 20 plus children to try and teach and maintain some level of control on. Let me tell you something about a room full of children. They're like, it's like being in a bag of human popcorn, okay? Kids are up and about, flying around, stuff's being tossed around. Once you lose control of a classroom, it is like being in a giant bag of human popcorn and you're just trying to survive, okay? That's what happens when you lose control of a classroom. How do you maintain control of the classroom? You set clear boundaries, you define the boundaries clearly, and then you execute disciplinary measures when some kid pushes against one of those boundaries too far just to test you. And if your child is ADHD, if your child is, oppositional defiant, if your child has certain issues that cause them to come into conflict with authority and challenge boundaries and push the limits, yeah, your child is probably gonna get singled out for that reason, okay? And it's nobody's fault, but the teacher, for the love of God, has to maintain control of the classroom, period, right? Because your child's not the only child there. There are 19 other children for whom they are responsible, okay? When your child is constantly pushing the boundaries and pushing the envelope and seeing what he or she can or cannot get away with and constantly trying to push and redefine the boundaries, all the other children are also observing that. And whenever you give grace and allowance to that one child who is the habitual line stepper and boundary pusher, it is no time flat. Within an instant, within just a few minutes, all the other children are going to start mimicking that, because all the other children are going to realize, we now have an influx of freedom. We now have the ability to do more than we previously did. And what are they going to do? It is literally the same thing to children as giving them a brand new toy. When you give them a brand new freedom in the classroom, guess what they're going to do? They're going to use it, right? So monkey see, monkey do. One child does it, one child gets away with it. They all do it. And that's what the teacher has to prevent, okay? And when it's one child that is constantly pushing the boundary, because they all do it anyways, all right? So you've already got 20 children already doing it, okay? And when you define the boundaries so that 19 of the 20 children don't want to push it any further, but then you've got this one child to be the hero advocate of all the other children to see if they can push boundaries and push you to your breaking point. When that one child is habitually and repeatedly doing it, eventually that child just flat out runs out of grace. Hands down. They run out of grace. Why? Because you know where the routine's going. You're now 110 days into the school year, and out of those 110 days, this child tries 5 to 10 times a day to push the same boundaries over and over and over. One day, you just have enough. You go to school, you know exactly what's on this child's mind. They're like little velociraptors, okay? If you have a child who is a, quote, misbehaved child with conduct issues and doesn't respect rules or boundaries, just understand that they're little velociraptors running around, testing the boundaries, testing the fence. And eventually, the teachers are just going to just immediately contain your child. So the second that they walk into the classroom, they say, all right, so they're pretty much going to put your child into a, for lack of a better term, an imaginary cell. Okay, they're going to get your child boxed in. They're going to get warnings immediately. They're going to do everything they can to shut it down before it ever even starts. Because trust me, it gets old. Dealing with your child gets old. And it's not the teacher's fault. It's not your child's fault. If your child's disordered, your child cannot help it. However, you got to understand some shit too, all right? Because dealing with your child at home may be challenging enough as it is, but you don't have 19 other children that you somehow got to teach how to do addition and subtraction and how to conjugate verbs and phonics and how to read and to understand what xylem and phloem are in the middle of a plant. Does anybody remember xylem and phloem? Right? Exactly. But somehow you got to get children to remember how to do that and to somehow perform well on a standardized test. And your child's the velociraptor running around testing the fence and turning the entire classroom of children into a giant bag of human popcorn, throwing shit around. Okay? And if you don't have solid rules, if the second you let up, everybody remembers there's always one substitute teacher that the kids knew that they could break and destroy. Okay? Any substitute teacher that comes into a school gets tested, and all the students know exactly which substitutes can be defeated, and basically just try to psychologically murder a substitute teacher. That practice is still alive and well, and before long you have a substitute teacher who's just trying not to actually bring an actual bottle of liquor to school just to cope with all the children who constantly run them over. Or they put it into a Chick-fil-A cup because nobody questions Chick-fil-A, right? Think about that one a second. Does your kid's teacher drink Chick-fil-A? You might want to look into that. Nobody thinks about it. So anyways, what can you do as a teacher? What can you do as a student? What can you do as a parent? It's simple. Understand one thing. Your child is disordered. Understand a second thing. A teacher has to maintain order in the classroom. Understand a third thing. Your child inevitably will run out of grace. That's a fact. Because there are other children whose educations matter and whose behavior matters. So, stay in touch with your teacher, listen to your child, listen to the teacher, take off the red cape and S, and instead of trying to go out and win social justice and social freedom, instead sit down with the other adult and come up with a solution instead of just charging off to administration. Thank you. God bless. Have a good day.